Hello?
Hello? Can you guys
Hi.
hear me?
I can hear, yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
So we're waiting on Pooja, Ronnie. Pooja's just joined. Patrick is he gonna log in?
No, he's not.
Okay. Let me ping him real quick.
He's joining from. He was trying to get on the internet and he couldn't.
Okay.
So he's just trying to figure it out. But he should be on shortly. I was just on the phone with him.
Okay. Let me check on Ronnie real quick. All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started? There's an echo on the line. So if you're not speaking, can you mute yourselves? Thank you. All right, so what we're going to do is just actually go through the list. I think it'll be better if I post all of the first in the chat area so that we can follow along. Everyone can follow along. They can post their questions in the chat room as we go through. And I think there's 6 clarifications, Patrick, that we need. And so here is the first one. When I spoke to, from my last meeting, we discussed about developing using the email address for mobile users and then mapping that email address to a PCV ID on the back end. Now, we understand you currently do not do this now, but this is the route that you want to take. I did confirm this with Matthew, and we will get some, we'll just have some test data to test this with going forward. But we just wanted to make sure that this is just given a confirmation, I guess. If you could do that for us, Patrick. And you can unmute your line.
And okay, so you can log in with your email. But then we're saying we would then validate that email on the back end with a PCV ID or connect it to. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, and then when you say we don't have data, you're talking about the PCV IDs we don't have?
Well, you all have them. We're not going to. I'm going to mute you, Patrick. Okay, thanks.
Hey.
We're not going to use. Yeah, so we're not going to use what you have just yet, but we will. We have the format of the PCV ID, and we'll use that for testing. And when we get ready to do some user acceptance testing, we'll probably have to get Matthew or somebody on your IT department to enter in that data, some of the test data for your whoever's going to be testing. So that's the route we'll take for now. Does that sound good?
And so the point of this is just to random person using the app and entering data.
Well, we have to map what the users are going to be using, right? So if they are, let's say they're assigned to a post, they're assigned to a sector, those particular sectors has an objective and outputs and outcomes that they are going to be using against, right? They're going to.
Correct.
So that's the reason behind making sure that we know the PCV ID, as well as when they're pushing the outputs and the outcomes, we have to understand which outputs and outcomes, and that really is determined by the PCV ID. or the whoever the Peace Corps volunteer is.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
and well, I mean, and then because the alternative would be they just pick their country in the login, but this would be a more automated way to do that, correct?
Right, but when
Yeah.
they would probably only pick their country the first time when they first time log in.
Right.
Okay.
Uh, okay. Yeah. I'm just. I mean, we definitely can map to the PCB IDs. We definitely can have all that data. Um, so I guess the short answer to your question is yes. If we think that that's good, and we want that validation, and somehow it would help, then we definitely can do that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just actually going to put confirmation on number 1. Anybody have any questions on that before we move on to number 2? Okay, good. So here is the second one. All right. We talked about pushing when we want to push the data, when we want to have updates to the outputs and outcomes on the mobile device. So these are the 4 scenarios. When they first install or log in, we definitely want to update or bring down all of the outputs and outcomes. The second one is automatically on a weekly basis if they're connected. Okay, if they're connected, then do it on a weekly basis. No, the third one is if they have been disconnected and then they are reconnected, maybe, and this could be, a week, this could be a month, but whenever they are reconnected, then you check for updates. And then we definitely want to do manual updates.
All right, so can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Cool. So Patrick and I talked about this. If the user is connected to Wi-Fi and the
Matthew, you're going in and out. I don't know if anybody else is hearing the same thing I am, but you're going in and out. So if you can.
Yeah. So, all right. Hopefully you can hear this, but basically we need to draw a distinction between the hear anything that.
Matthew, you're breaking up. I'll answer it. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So we're talking about the distinction between Wi-Fi, the definition of connected. And so connected through Wi-Fi, which they would have like unlimited, data for the most part, is something that's what I consider connected. And I think that's when we can do any of these options. I think would be fine. What I want to avoid is I want to avoid the definition of connected just being connected to cellular data, because that's like the most precious thing to people. And if they're really rationing out their cellular data very particularly. So for me, it's just about let's make sure that it's connected to Wi-Fi and not just connected to data.
I also have something to add too.
Okay.
For connection, will there be, when you say manual, will there be a button that volunteers can press that's like sync data now? Because that would definitely help out so that when they are ready to sync up or where they are in a location that they need to sync, they're able to sync up their data, they can press it. Is that what you guys mean by manual updates?
Yes, and I was thinking that maybe, and the rest of the team, if you have an idea, please jump in as well. That maybe we can allow the mobile users to determine whether they want. Well, if they do that, then they may forget to do an automatic updates. They may forget to do manual updates. But yes, we should have a sync button, a manual update button where they can actually sync the done. That's definitely a done deal. And the first time they log in, we definitely want to push in. So how do we determine? So we only want to determine if they are connected through Wi-Fi, and that's when we go through the other checks of the update, and that's what I hear from Patrick.
Yeah, and I would say weekly might be a little too often, just because I mean we're talking about changes to these things in terms of outputs and outcomes for a particular country. So for like something that I'm likely to actually report on, we're talking about maybe once a year that would change. Now, if you add up all 65, so if we're talking about the whole menu of things that they possibly could do it, we're talking maybe more often than that. But I think weekly's a little probably too aggressive. So it could be monthly, just to ask, check for updates ? And they do it or something.
Okay. So monthly check. The monthly update.
Yeah, and Rose, I think the extra part there is the fact that we're encouraging the user to manually sync, because then I think that solves all of the problems of like data. Is once a month they get a prompt rather than once a month we automatically do something without asking.
Okay, so here's the thing. Also, we could probably just do the manual updates. And then if you want, whenever there's an update on the back end anyway, we push it out to the mobile device, is right. When there's an update to the application or anything, there's always an update that comes on your device or indicator or notification. But if we don't do any automatic updates, or we could do the 30-day updates or monthly updates, you probably have to incorporate that into your training as well. Just, if when you push it out, just let people know, maybe that's something that we can put on the info hub or some directions or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. If we're making changes to the mobile application, that updated mobile application is going to have an updated data schema. So if they're updating the version of their application, they're updating their data schema at the same time. So that's fine. That's a nice way to slide that in.
I was gonna advocate for like fully manual. Like if something on the back end is being updated, can't there just be like an alert saying like your version is out of date, please update it as soon as possible, instead of pushing all that data onto the volunteer?
So doesn't even that little warning of you have something that's out of date sync, that even takes up a little bit of data, right?
I believe so.
So, I think Patrick's point is like the data is so precious and there's usually so little of it that if they've got a tablet that has 20 other apps that are also syncing like this, they're going to run through their data just being notified that they have stuff to update, and they're going to, especially if they're only connected once a month, everything's going to need updating, right? I mean, all of our apps update so frequently that it drives us nuts. So I think even that little burden of saying there's an update is going to drive people a little crazy, and so having a prompt that says do a manual sync that gives them that choice and reminds them that it's important to have the most recent data structure is probably sufficient.
Okay, so when they do a first install, let's say they install on the 15th, today on the 17th, and then just have a next month on the 17th, they just have a little reminder alert. And they do the actual manual update. They do the syncing themselves. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and if at that point there's no update, then hopefully it's a very, very small data burden to inform them. No updates, thanks for checking.
Okay.
Patrick, is that accurate to what we talked about? Is that what you feel as well?
Yeah, I wonder if we even push it even further on a monthly. I just have a hard time believing that these data frameworks are going to change that often. I guess a month is not. I don't know. Findo, what do you think? What how often are you okay being bugged about an update?
My only issue is that users like staff going in and making like small updates and then like telling the volunteers update your apps because there's like a learning curve. So that's my main concern. But if it's manual, then that's good. The frameworks don't change as often, but when they are in the process of changing, they do change a lot. Like our country has two frameworks, so they gave us like a draft one, and then finally, after several months, they give us the updated one. So maybe that was like two changes. So yeah, that's just my comment. Just like my fear was the learning curve on the back end of like staff pushing updates that may not be as important as they think they are to the volunteers. So yeah,
It's a good
manual
point.
updates are good. Yeah.
And then okay, yeah. So I would say we try to. I mean, our goal here is just to minimize the amount of kind of surprise data transfer to the volunteers, so we want to have them maintain control. And I think I think every 2 months would probably be fine. I mean, you're talking about two updates over your 2 years.
I think our framework, yeah, probably changed like two times, no more than two or three times. Yeah.
Yeah, so it might. I would be comfortable with 6 months. I mean, and knowing that they can at any time, check for updates or something. They can manually do it at any time. But like
I
in terms of the prompt, I would say like if they haven't updated within 6 months, then they get a prompt or something like that. Or
would advocate for like 3 months because our VRFs are usually due quarterly.
okay, that's a good call. Good call. Yeah, tie
So
it
this
to
is one of those
the
things
most
I think,
likely.
too, that
I was just saying.
Yeah, go
I was going to say that the most frequent. It's so true. The most frequent VRF reporting schedule would be quarterly. Some are like twice a year. So it's true. We could do 3 months or 4 months to line up with that.
And this is one variable in the code we're talking about. So I think settling on 3 months and calling that good for right now is works great.
Okay. Also, and Niraj had a good point too. And we're talking about updates here, but when the Peace Corps at headquarters deletes something, has that ever happened? Deletes an objective or either output or outcome. So we'll definitely have to push that update out, right?
Yeah, so this in the original requirements document, there was a big kind of section about how we need to make sure we're doing updates in a non-destructive fashion, because I really want us to avoid the scenario in which because we're updating a framework, the data that's already been entered for the previous quarter, the previous 6 months, that was still being collected and is accurate for the previous 6 months doesn't get deleted. So we need to somehow make sure that we're not, just because an update gets pushed out, we don't actively delete data that's been recorded, because it could still be relevant and applicable to a previous quarter or previous year's data schema.
Okay. And so that would not happen on the headquarters side, though, right? We're talking about the control center. There would not be. Would we want them to delete on the back end at all?
So, there's kind of two backends, I guess. So the backend that pushes out a data schema that we're asking volunteers to input data on could change and could get slimmed down and smaller. That's the goal, actually, is to reduce the data burden and make things, constantly make them better and more streamlined. But if we've asked for more data previously, it's still important that the app exports and transmits whatever we asked for previously in its entirety, and that it doesn't go through and delete. Like if we have sections A, B, and C in 2013, and then 2014 we were only asking for sections A and B, when a user sends their data to Peace Corps, we still in 2013 are going to record that now deleted section C, for instance. Like that data needs to still be transmitted, and it's just not going to be collected going forward for the following year, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay.
So we really don't want to push framework to delete a previous framework's data input.
Okay. All right, so let me update this really quick so that everybody, so we still have the updates on the first install and login. Manual updates, we're going to have them sync where the users can sync themselves. And then we have a reminder at 3 months. Okay, that's the new one. And then we don't want to delete anything from the framework that we've asked.
Yeah, an updated framework basically should not be retroactively applied, if that makes sense. Like a framework, when we push it out, is good for the period in which it's out there and live, and doesn't need to be like retroactively changed when a future update's made.
Okay.
I feel like this is actually like the trickiest part of the initial requirements doc, so that's why I'm like trying to be really intentional about how I explain it, because I think it's probably tricky to do programmatically, so I kind of sympathize with how this could be like a tricky data ask. But I want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with that, because I think the worst case scenario would be a user installs a data framework that's going to be used 3 months from now, and what that does instead is it deletes a whole bunch of the data they've been working on for the previous year that Peace Corps is still going to ask for that reporting year.
Okay.
Concerning programming for the mentees, maybe what they could do is take the framework and put it in a text file, and then maybe make it delimited, like by maybe like a dash, and then read it in word by word, and then maybe have it compared to what's currently in the system. Potentially, if that's like, if you want to, do that fast, that might be a way to do it.
Okay. All right, this is good.
I think the thing we could also do, I don't know if this is possible, I'm just trying to think about this a little bit through, is we could somehow on the, like tag when we're exporting this data, like tag an ID that's associated with that data framework. So if we call a data framework like 1267, we say all the data that's being exported right now was entered under X schema or something like that. So that way, if these things are changing, we at least could like take a step back, look at a previous version, and figure out how this was mapped. I don't know. I'm trying to. This is outside my area of expertise, so I'm relying on kind of like people who understand databases and data structures a little bit better to do this versioning. But whatever we can do to do this in a non-destructive fashion is perfect.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and you're talking about a section of data or an assigned, like a sector or a goal and objective, all the way across all the outputs and outcomes for goal and objective, for a particular goal and objective, and just making sure that we track that in all the updates. Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Cool.
And it might be even better and more efficient to only send those updates, because it could be just one, right? We don't want to have to send the whole entire thing. We're just updating one or two. So come on in. Okay. Anyone from the team have any questions?
I just wanted to point out for app developers in the call that you shouldn't be syncing data you've already synced, because data is expensive, as Patrick explained. So if you've already synced some data, you shouldn't be syncing it again. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
This is only for app developers.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, this really is for us on the back end. So, okay.
So I had a question, but I don't know if it's listed. Is it listed, Rose?
Go ahead and what's your question, and I'll see if it's listed.
Okay. So during the previous meeting, there was talk about the outputs and outcomes, and so I think it was decided that a volunteer has only one framework associated with them or one set of outputs and outcomes. So when I was in Botswana, we had two frameworks, and I found myself sometimes reporting on the other framework. But I know Peace Corps is going through changes, so this could just be lost data. Like, you know, I was a health volunteer, but we also had youth volunteers. So when I did work with youth and it was more related to youth, I would put it in the youth framework. But
yeah, so this is a great point. And after last week's call when Rose and I talked, I checked on this, and you're totally correct that a volunteer can report on multiple goals, and that's still true across all of our posts. And so we want someone to be able to report both on education outputs as well as health outputs. So you should be able to report on more than one framework.
Okay. And when you're using the terminology framework, so is that framework sectors, goals, and objectives?
Framework is the entire tree, the entire data structure outline. So it's all the way from goal all the way down to outputs and objectives and everything in between.
Okay, but you are saying that this is confirmed that volunteers can report on more than one framework.
Correct. Yep.
And so usually I think they're, and correct me if I'm wrong, the frameworks are based upon our sectors, because I was in health and then there was youth and there was like a couple of other ones. Could it be like an option where they're like, what sectors are in your country, and then those frameworks will be uploaded to those things?
I think that's a really good call, because then that actually that's a really great idea, because that avoids, you know, to Raj's point, then we're not downloading things that the user's never going to use. But I think we do want to, on that initial app install, if there's 3 sectors in the country that are being worked on, all the frameworks for those 3 sectors initially download, or at least all the data inputs that a user could potentially put into the app for those sectors are downloaded. I think that's a really great call.
But they don't have to necessarily be assigned to that one. They're just going to we're just going to bring down all of the framework for that post.
Right, because if on the side you work on a different project, you know, not necessarily related to the goal you're assigned, we still want to know that you worked on that. So if you work on a malaria project on the side, we still need to know that you're distributing bed nets, for instance, to help with malaria.
Hold on, let me ask, hold on.
Okay.
So the only reason why, so a volunteer has, so like Finda had her own project framework for her. That's her sector and her country, and it's unique by sector and country. There's also other project frameworks for Botswana as well. So like if there's a youth volunteer in Botswana, they have their own unique project framework for Botswana youth. So an individual volunteer only has one project framework that's like theirs. However, the point is that you can actually, you know, the ultimate goal would be you could report on any indicator, any indicator in the entire Peace Corps if you wanted to. Now, it's likely that you're most likely to report on indicators that are your own specific ones. Maybe secondarily would be the ones that are also within your country. So like Finda's talking about her second, the second project framework, and those just represent more likelihood that you would report on them. But if we can, we want to maintain the ability to report out on anything, anytime, anywhere. But that's
a good point.
So it doesn't matter if because if malaria happens not to be part of either the education or the youth in Botswana, we still want to be able to report out on it. It's just, I guess we just want to use these things to present likelihood that they would. So it's almost like a weighting factor on if we get to suggested indicators. So like this is the indicator that you might want to add or something that's like a feature that we're trying to talk about. We could use those things to in the algorithm that would produce the most likely, but we still have the ability to report on any indicator in any country, anywhere, no matter where no matter where you're at.
Oh, so it doesn't even have to be.
I was gonna add that concerning that I feel like that should be left to the responsibility of our posts, because Peace Corps did have in their framework something that captured stuff outside of when we didn't do something within health or youth. It was like a catch-all for other stuff that we might have done. So I would put that back on like the Peace Corps offices in the country to make sure that they're creating frameworks that are flexible enough that we can report as best as we can.
Yeah, and so I mean the current VRT, you can choose any indicator anywhere, and so I would say it's ridiculous to tell the volunteer that they should know all 600 indicators. So that's why we want to create project frameworks that are the 10 that they're most likely to actually report out on. And so that's why they're working, to Finda's point, they're working to make it encapsulate the things that they are actually like supposed to report out. And so again, we want to prioritize those, not because they're any, they are sort of more important, but at the same time, they are the more likely for them to actually be reporting on. So for user experience, there is a hierarchy of likelihood that I would do this, because these are the ones I've been trained on. This is like the projects, these are the most likely ones that I'm going to report on in terms of outputs and indicators. So we want to prioritize them, bring them to the top, but at the same time, we still want the ability to be able to report out on anything.
Okay, and I think that's the design that we have currently, because they are absolutely able to enter in activities and measurements as well. And these are what we have default ones, but they should be able to enter their own as well. Is that right, team?
Yeah, Raj, what were you going to say?
I was wondering if, you answered one of my questions. The other one was, so you were saying that the secondary objectives that the PCV reports on, they can be from anywhere in the world, right? That Peace Corps is. So it's not going to be. It doesn't have to be from the same post. Is that correct?
Right. It doesn't have to be, but it's likely that it would be those. It's almost like it's just a hierarchy of likelihood.
Mm-hmm.
Because
and can the PCV take the initiative to report on something, or are they asked?
They can report out on anything they want. So like on the current VRT, you can search the entire list, pick out an indicator, and report on it. We might weigh those differently. We might look at those and say, those, it's good. We're getting this thing in, somebody saying they're doing malaria education in the Ukraine. That's awesome. But we might not. We might put a little factor of they weren't actually trained to do this, so we won't, weigh this or about. I don't know.
So the primary objectives are determined by the post, and the secondary ones can be anything that the PCV decides. Is that correct?
Yes. So they can choose. So they're trained on their project framework. There are probably some, like in Finda's situation, there's probably some leak over to the other, volunteer project frameworks inside their own country. But then at the same time, we have these cross-sector, things that every volunteer can do. So it's just kind of like, we train to the 10 that they're most likely to do some secondary training on maybe the next 20, and we don't mention 500 of them because there's so many.
So here's my suggestion, Patrick, and team. And anybody can just jump on in here as well. Since the secondary, let us focus on the primary for this first development phase. And we pull that from based on the post, the sector, and what's already defined for goals and objectives. Then as a secondary, then that would definitely be coming back to the on the application side, on the desktop side, or the web application, because that's we probably have to really look at the data and how we would pull that, if we would have even pulled that in on the mobile app.
Could we do some comparison on like what the data difference is in terms of the initial sync? Because if it's relatively small, the difference is relatively small between doing just that one country's indicators and doing the whole Peace Corps spreadsheet. It seems like just doing the whole thing up front would make more sense then.
Yeah. So you're saying bring in all the countries, all the Peace Corps countries data the first time.
Yeah.
All their listed, all the indicators.
Yeah.
I would say that would be really scary, because then when other countries are updating their frameworks, I don't know, like that seems like a lot. But if that's what needs to be done, it just seems like a lot to me.
Okay.
That's the question to me. Is like, is that a lot? In terms of, just in terms of, does that make the app too big? Because
yeah, we'll have to evaluate.
This is where I think we want a little bit more of a data-driven decision on, like, can we actually figure out, like, what, in raw numbers, how much does this going to require on the mobile side, and how much bandwidth does this require? And
well, the only data that we have is the Thailand data, right? So
no, well, we had a spreadsheet that was like 90% complete. Now I've got a spreadsheet that's 100% complete that I'll upload.
Okay, yeah, do that, and then we can let's leave this off for next week, and let's give us some time to look at that and analyze it. Let me just put a note here.
Yeah, I'll put that on GitHub.
And I want to be perfectly clear that we wouldn't present that. We wouldn't present all 700 indicators or whatever in the mobile device. We would just present, the likely ones. So their project framework probably. But then the idea of like add an indicator.
Yeah.
That's where all this other stuff would draw from.
Because the real design behind this PeaceTrack is making the data entry as easy as possible, and so that algorithm Patrick's alluding to on how likely are you to input X indicator is yes, based on your location, your sector, your country, but then also ideally, like what you're starting to type into other sections of that data entry field.
Okay.
So we want to just be really smart about how we're like mining this data to present it to the user to enter it with as little burden as possible on their end.
Okay. All right. So you're going to, let me put this down. To GitHub. All right. So we'll upload that, and we'll, as a team, look at that. We'll start evaluating that as soon as it's available, and then see what we can come up with, both on the back end and mobile. Okay. All right. Let's get to the cohorts. We had questions about the cohort. Do we need to store the cohort at any point? I know this is something that the volunteers will be driving, but do we need to store those cohorts?
On the back end?
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to answer this right now, but we just, as far as the database design, this is important for us. So,
Patrick, do you have a take on that?
it depends on what you mean by store the cohort. So we're talking about you're talking about. So I think so. What we talked about last time was that the cohort is just gonna be a name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not gonna put any more information about the cohort besides the name. So in terms of storing it, it could be like we need to have it so that we can associate outcomes with the cohort, so we can measure that. But we also, the only other thing I can think of is like if you name a cohort, market ladies, and then next time when you go to choose a cohort, if you could choose market ladies again, it might just be a better, cleaner way to make sure we don't have market ladies spelled differently or something, and you don't mess up any of the data.
Yeah,
I think the answer is we're going to transmit that data to the Peace Corps backend as well. So I think on the HQ side we would store that information as well.
Okay, and I think we also agreed to add a short description. We have a name and then we add a short description, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what everyone's saying. Yeah, it would be really awesome if it's stored locally so that we could reuse the same names when we're working with the same cohort over and over again. It would be really useful.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. All right, that's good. And I think here's the we had a question in the discussion about, I know we talked about this the last time. Does Peace Corps define age ranges for cohorts? So do you all define the age ranges? Is that really critical?
That's not on the table at the moment, yeah.
Okay, so this is something, but does it need to be reported on?
Nope. No, so what we came to last week was that cohorts are literally just like a mental reminder and association for the volunteer, but all that age data is getting entered at the point of an activity or at the point of a measurement.
So age data is at the point of activity or measurement.
That's the disaggregation on that. That's the primary disaggregation of an indicator when we're first entering an activity.
Okay.
Patrick, are we doing that for measurement as well? We would be, right? We have to do it for measurement as well as activity, right?
We said last week that it would be number measured, number achieved, male and female. That's the disaggregations for an outcome.
But not by age?
Not by age, no.
So you didn't, but last week we talked about males here.
Yeah. We talked about that for outputs. So like if you're like that standard output list, that's the age aggregations for outputs, which we're calling, which I'm saying the same as participation.
Okay, so the males, let's clarify that if you don't mind. So for the output, we're actually going to do males and age, gender and age.
Yep, and there's the 4 buckets of ages. So there's actually, yeah.
Okay. And then for outcome, we're only going to do just the gender?
Yep, but we're gonna have 4. So we have males measured, males achieved.
Okay.
Females measured, females achieved.
Okay. All right, and Mirage, go ahead with your question. I'm taking notes.
Yeah, you guys still want to see on the app, you still want to see graphs for cohorts, right? You want to see the performance for a cohort?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I think I got it. Gender and age, gender, 4 buckets. All right, and what was that? You wanted to see the graph?
I was just confirming if they still want to see the graphs for the cohorts.
Okay.
Yeah. And Rose, the disaggregation thing I put in a comment in last week's call also. So
Okay.
if you want, you can just take it from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Pooja had one more question as well. Let me get that question. Oh, this is about the Marvel app.
Yeah, I think Raj, you could do the best job explaining this. Because I think you do it the best.
Well, let me first see which graph it is. What activities? Sorry, you have to look at which graph it should be.
Both activities and outcomes are mentioned in the graph. While updating both activities and outcomes affect the graph. It's the graph for users to analyze the activities.
Okay, we have activities and outcomes. So the question is, will updating both activities and outcomes affect this graph? For users to analyze which activities are responsible for good or bad performance. So I think what we discussed with Patrick the last time was when we show this graph, we basically have no way of saying which activities affect a given outcome because activities go with outputs. So if you're looking at this graph, you do want to see the performance for the outcomes. So the outcomes, those data points, they come from the measurements that you take. As to which activities are important or affected, those measurements you don't really know. So I think what we discussed last time was just show all the activities you did for that cohort. And then the user needs to look into the data and then see and make, deduce which ones affected the outcome. Does that answer your question, Pooja?
Pooja, I think you're on mute, maybe. Check your laptop.
Yeah. So in the graph, we are showing the relationship between both the outcomes and the activities. So I wanted to know whether we want to show the outcomes only or the activities as well.
We're showing both, but you don't really know which activities affect a given outcome. So you will show all activities that took place for that cohort.
Okay.
Is that correct, Patrick and
Yeah,
Matthew?
and Raj, you can talk about like how that, because I think when it crystallized to me when you explain it as like you have the graph and then you have below it you have almost like the activity log by time. Like when you talked about just presenting that in a mobile device, that made it a little bit more clear for me.
Okay.
There, like
So Pooja, I think when we discussed the UI, we were saying that below the graph we'll have a view activities button, which lets you choose a date range and then shows you activities only for that date. So I think Patrick said by default we want to show. Patrick, could you remind me what was the default option that you said? The more intelligent choice would be to show activities from.
Did I say something? Let's see.
I put it in a note in the document.
Okay. Was it either so? It's probably.
Oh yeah, I think you said so. If I remember correct, what you said was when you say view activities, the user gets to see. He has to choose an output, okay, and then choose the date range. If you don't choose the date range, then by default you will show the interval for which your outcomes improve the most. So if you're looking at that graph, you will look at the week for which the slope was the highest, and you will only show activities within that time frame. which activities, you will show all the activities for the cohort.
Yeah.
And if the user does select time range, then of course you only show activities from that time range. But again, you show all activities for that cohort because you don't know a priori which activities affect which outcomes, because activities don't directly affect outcomes.
Right. I agree with that. So it's a little bit fancy. It was a little bit fancy, but I just thought it'd be a cool thing to do. It's just like greatest slope of that line, show the activities in between it as the default. Just as the default.
So on this graph, do you still want to see activities, or you just want to see measurements? Because I think her second question is, are we showing? Well,
yeah, no, so it's almost like you got to take the activities thing off of that graph and put it below it.
Okay, so on the graph you'll have only measurements.
Right.
Okay. Pooja, does that?
And then it's just a different way. It's just a different way to present the data because Raj and I talked about it, like it'll be too crowded and it'll be too difficult to be able to do that. So the thought was just take the activities off and just list them below and have that be the way you view them.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Wow, we're almost done and got through all of our questions.
Good.
This is good stuff. I like the weekly meetings on this time, so we'll continue these. We probably want to do another PeaceTrack for next week, but then maybe the following week we'll do malaria.
Okay.
So we'll bring in the malaria thing.
That'd be great. So I'll be gone next week, but Matthew will be there. And then,
Okay.
But I will be back the next time. I'm going on a big bike ride across Iowa.
Okay.
So I assume I'm coming back. I haven't ridden a bike in a year. But I'm gonna ride across Iowa. Yeah.
Take lots of pictures.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Raj, can you hold on for 1 second?
Sure.